Welcome to the Careers by Jenn podcast, episode 229. This time on the podcast, Jenn speaks with her guest Flip Flippen about how your life stories impact your career. Okay, I've been trying to think up something that's hopefully clever or at least mildly amusing or self-deprecating to say about this interview, and I've got nothing. So I've decided to take this opportunity to tell a joke instead. How many surrealist painters does it take to screw in a light bulb? The fish. If you didn't get it, that's okay. Maybe surrealist painter jokes just aren't your cup of Volkswagens.
You're listening to the Careers by Jenn podcast. I'm your host, Jenn Swanson. This is the podcast that helps you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. Careers by Jenn is a listener-sponsored podcast, and if you like the content, please consider supporting the show as a patron. You can do so for as little as $1 a month. Head over to careersbyjenn.com and click on support to learn more. Hey friends, what's your life story? We're going to get to our topic of the day very soon, but first, can you believe it's September? I can't believe it. Time just flies. We haven't published a show for a couple of weeks because we were away enjoying some rest on beautiful Pender Island here in British Columbia. And there's no Wi-Fi in the place where we stay. Can you believe it? It was so restful just to unplug and to read real books and to rest and to walk by the ocean and to nap. It was so good. I hope you've had some rest this summer too before jumping back into the busyness of the fall. I wanted to mention that if you have a student or a graduate in your life, or if you yourself are looking for work or starting a new job, my book that was published a few years ago, What They See, How to Stand Out and Shine in Your New Job, is on sale on my website at careersbyjenn.com. So you can come over to the website, click on book at the top of the page to order, and I'll even sign it for you before it gets shipped. You can also drop me a line and I can write something special in it if you want. It's a quick read. It's full of tips on topics to do with the first 3 months of a new job and how to succeed in that first 3 months, especially during that trial period when you're on probation in a new job. There are topics like the 11 attributes of a professional and communication topics, giving and receiving feedback topics. There's even a whole chapter called the 30-Day Risk Challenge, where I invite you to stretch yourself and take some risks each day in order to grow. So check it out for yourself or for someone you know at careersbyjenn.com under book. All right, my guest today is someone who knows all about life stories and how they impact your career. Flip Flippen, and yes, there is a story about his name too. Flip Flippen is a New York Times best-selling author, and he's the founder of the Flippen Group, which is one of the fastest-growing educator training, corporate talent, and team development companies in the United States. Flip has a new book out called Your Third Story, Author the Life You Are Meant to Live, in which he shows us that there is more to life than the circumstances that we are born into, and empowers readers with tools and inspirations to write their own third story. From his early career working with kids in gangs to his later work in boardrooms and classrooms, Flip has dedicated himself to helping people write their new story. So the Flippen Group is the trusted advisor to Olympians, to professional sports teams, to military special forces, to Fortune 500 CEOs, and much more. I begin our conversation, as I usually do, with a question. Why are stories so important?
If I ask you, Jenn, where do you live? You have a story. What kind of car do you drive? You have a story. Do you have kids? You have a story. Everything you do has a story. And the interesting thing to me is, where do those stories come from? Are they stories that you were told? Are those stories that you actually wrote yourself, which is usually not the case? Are they stories that other people scripted for you and now you're living? And so So the question is, why are stories so important? Because they actually define everything you do in your life. But the real question behind that is, are those stories actually accurate? So that's a great question. Thanks.
Are those stories actually accurate? So one of the things I know is that we can recreate history in our minds and actually believe the things that we tell ourselves that may not have existed. Is that what you mean?
Well, yeah, that's part of it. I mean, our memories really aren't our memories. And as a psychotherapist, I mean, I'm very familiar with that. You look at some of the hottest neuroscience right now, every time you tell a story, you don't tell the whole story. And you don't tell the temperature, the humidity. You don't tell what the weather was like. You don't tell, there's tons of stuff you don't tell. You tell the salient points of the story. And then the ones that your audience, even if it's just one person, the points that the audience respond to, well, those points become even more salient in your own mind. And so our memories actually are shaped by the way we think about and retell our story. Now let me just add the complexity to that. If you ask me about a historical event and I say, oh, well, here's what's happened. Well, now I've remembered the event at that time. But the next time I tell it, I'm now remembering it for the second time. And the next time I'm remembering it for the third time. And so every time you tell that story or revisit that story migrates. And there's literally nothing we can do about that. And so our memories are constantly being shaped. But the real point that I'm after with that is that we tell ourselves things primarily to make us okay where we are, like we are. And that's one of the big things, especially in the area that you're in, Jen. When you just start talking about jobs and work and career and family and life, for example, I was with a young couple the other day and they're really, really struggling. And I wasn't seeing them as patients. They were friends. I don't see patients anymore. I run our companies. But the comment that she made, the young wife, is she said, I've always told myself we have a really great marriage, but I'm finding out now that's not true. Mm-hmm. And why do people tell themselves that? I hear people say, oh, I've got a great job. But you start talking to them and it's not really what they want to do. Or you'll visit with somebody about their career and I'll say, so how did you get in this position that you're in? And they tell you a story about how they got there. But I also know that they're telling themselves at the same time, this is the best that they could do. That's probably not true. But we tell ourselves things so that we're okay. And that's really what our book is about, your third story. That's the theme of the whole thing, is that there's really potentially three stories in your
life. And I'm remembering a quote, and I don't know who said it, but I use it often as don't believe everything you think. And I love it because it's so true.
It's very true. Our thoughts are, they're very deceiving and, they're shaped by a lot of different things. But, and if you want, I can tell you pretty quick what the thesis on your third story is, because it leads to that very thing.
Yes, I'm fascinated to hear about what the first and second stories are as well, and then the third story, but go ahead, yes.
Well, Jen, if I said, okay, so tell me your story, most everybody, and I've asked that question to thousands of people all over the world, but I ask them and they say, oh, well, I was born here and I grew up here and I went to school here and I did these things. And, I thought about going here, but I didn't. I did this, or I went to school here. I played these sports, or I didn't play these sports. And they tell this first story, which is from birth to, usually late adolescence. But the interesting thing about this story is that you didn't write that story. That's really not your story. It's certainly part of your life and a foundational part. But you did not write that story. You lived it, but you didn't write it. Somebody else wrote that story. But in adolescence is when we begin this second story. And adolescence to me is a really fascinating time. And it's interesting too, Jen, nobody thinks about this, but adolescence as a concept is only about 150 years old. And we could say, well, we've always had teenagers, but we didn't have an adolescent period until the post-industrial revolution, when people actually began to have time to have a time that was considered adolescence. But in adolescence, and I can even think in my own life, there's a girl I wanted to ask out, but I didn't ask her out because, and I had a story. And, there was another sport I told myself I wanted to play, but I had a story for why I didn't play that sport. And the sport that I did play, baseball, I had a great story for that sport. And so in adolescence, here's what we do. We tell ourselves stories why we do or don't do things. The problem with that is that at least half of those stories are not true. They're things we tell ourselves. Why didn't you try this? Oh, well, I didn't try that because of. And then we actually have a story, but it's really an excuse or a justification or a rationale. And I could give you a great example of that. When I was finishing up graduate school, I was probably half, 2/3 of the way through my program, and I met a gentleman from one of the leading universities in the world, and I'd presented a paper, and he invited me to come and finish my doctorate there with him at that university. It's one of the most prestigious universities in the world. And, now the question is did I go or did I not go? And I did not go. And I told myself, here's the reasons I'm not going to go. Where I am is great. I'm getting a great education here. I'm getting paid the same I'd be paid there in my graduate program. I've never lived that far away from home. My family wouldn't want me to go that far away. Golly, it's cold there. I don't have clothes for that. Gosh, how much does it cost? I have these endless stories, Jen, for why I did not go to one of the top universities in the world. And I told myself those stories. And once I believed those stories, so I told them to myself, and then I took them for a walk with a few friends. And I got those friends to agree with me as to why my reasons were so valid. You follow me?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then one day, somebody asked me, Flip, didn't you get invited to go so-and-so? And I was like, oh, yeah, I did. Why didn't you go? Oh, and I told him the same reasons. The interesting thing was that friend was really blunt. And he just looked at me and he said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Those are the kind of friends you need.
Yeah. You don't want a ton of them, but you've got to have some of them, And Jen, I'm telling you, my immediate response was to begin to explain to him why that was a good reason. And he literally looked at me and he said, Flip, you're an idiot. Are you kidding me? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Listen to yourself. And literally, I walked away from there, and that night I wrote in my journal, that was seriously stupid. And then I wrote down why, the real reason why I did not go to that university. And the real reason was, and I certainly don't mind telling you, is that I thought I would fail. I thought I was not smart enough to be there. I thought I was successful where I was. Why go someplace and be discovered as a fraud, as incompetent, not capable? Why would I expose myself to that? I'm not going to do that. And oh, by the way, here's why. And then you make up these reasons. And I see people do it all the time. They do it in their career. They do it in their relationship.
I wanted to say before I ask you about what all of that does to you is that it seems to all be based in fear, doesn't it? The justification and the denial.
Yeah, a lot of it is. And a lot of people, they don't realize that. And you could say, well, gosh, in my career, for example, how am I being held up by something like fear? I mean, I have a good job, et cetera. And it's that you tell yourself a story that keeps you from taking a risk. You may see something that you want to try. You may want a change, but you end up telling yourself, "No, I'm okay. I'm happy. It's not worth it. That could go wrong. It could not pan out like I want." And so I think that usually there is some fear behind it. There are lots of other things that do that too. It could be that you could have a deep sense of shame from your past where you tried something and it didn't work, and you're carrying that shame. It could be that you have some guilt. It could be that you continually blame yourself for earlier failures that now are handicapping you in terms of being able to move forward and take that next step.
So what does this all do as far as your career goes?
Well, here's what that second story does is that, we know a few people, you and I both do, that they're stuck in their first story. I mean, they can never really get away from this very small life that was defined in their hometown or by their parents or their family. We know a handful of people like that. And you'll see them at a class reunion or something, and they've just never been able to get beyond, that very early part of life. But in that second story, what it does is it causes you to live a life that is much smaller than what your life could be. You really do not do what you had the potential to do. And I know for me, Jenn, when I looked at, for example, that graduate school example in my own personal life, I mean, I wrote down in my journal, I will never again let my fears dictate my decisions. And I went from that to living a life on a global stage at quite candidly a huge level, and I love it, and it's very humbling at the same time, because all I've been able to do with that is to continue to challenge what I think. When I think about why I can't do something, I challenge it, and I start saying, well, why couldn't I do that? I think I could do that.
So is that one of the ways that you would, because sometimes it's a lack of self-awareness, and the people that I know, I'm thinking of one person in particular who I think is stuck in her second story, talking about a time in life, the stories about the first adult job and the time spent in that first adult job. This is a person who's well past retirement age, who only ever tells stories about that particular time of life, and it nothing about what's happened in the 45 years since. And so if you're not self-aware, then you don't know you're doing that.
Yeah. And even that comment there about 45 years, I mean, golly, that's that person's entire lifetime.
I know.
And so let's back up and think for a second. I mean, why would people get stuck? And when you say you're not self-aware, here's the paradox. Jenn, you can't be self-aware by yourself. It's an oxymoron. You can't. I mean, the only thing that you can see in the mirror is the front of your head. And there's this other whole back part that you really can't get a good look at. And so people can't be self-aware by themselves. They have to have good feedback. And you've got to have feedback from people that they love you, but they also will be honest with you. They'll challenge some of the things that you think. I mean, this morning I had some New Zealanders here that had flown in for business meetings, and they're working on a proposal. And I started asking questions, and they said, well, we couldn't do this because of this. And we don't think we could do this because of this. And, this couldn't be done. And, well, in New Zealand, we would not do that. And I listened to those answers, and these are really, really good people. They're very bright and very capable. And after, 10 minutes of that, I said, and tell me why not? Well, and then everything they came up with, I was like, why not? Why not? And it was not 15 minutes. And they were like, oh my gosh, we've never even challenged these basic assumptions we're making about what we can do. And I said, you can do so much more than you've ever thought about. Good gracious, you're not even close to your capacity. And Jenn, this is our first time to visit, but I'm going to tell you, and impressed with the podcast and things you're doing. You're not anywhere near your potential, and neither am I. And that's kind of crazy, isn't it? I mean, isn't that a cool thought?
Oh, it is. It is. Well, this is why. I mean, I'm a coach myself, but this is why I value having my own coach, to ask those hard questions and to push and to challenge the assumptions. Because I agree with you. I couldn't do what I've done so far without having somebody to say, shake it up a bit and say, why not? Or to ask the really hard questions when I don't want to go there.
Exactly. Exactly. That's very true.
So we've got the first story and the second story. So what is the third story?
Well, first you've got to challenge the second story. You can't have a third story if you don't challenge the second story.
Right.
And so there's the big catch for people. You literally have to have the courage. Now, it doesn't just take courage. You can also have a catastrophic event that'll really make you challenge your second story. But for me, I don't want to have the catastrophic event. I really want to have the courage to just look at different things and say, is this really true? Like I have a phenomenal wife, and we've got a great marriage, and we have a ball together. We travel, work, we do all kinds of things. Susan runs our companies. I mean, we have a great time together. But if you really challenge that, and I say, well, wow, am I really as good a husband as I could be? Probably not. I wonder what that could look like. Wow, I bet I could change this and this. And you start thinking, why am I not doing that? I could do that. The same is true for parenting. So, for example, in our career right now, we're the largest educator training company in North America. And I love that. Years ago, one of the team came and said, Flip, we ought to be doing this on the corporate side too. And I'm like, okay, where would you want to do it? And he literally said, well, I think we ought to focus on the U.S. And one of the other teams said, well, how about just the world? And I was like, yeah, I mean, well, okay. I mean, I guess why not? Now we do business all over the world, all the time. But we could have easily just said, we're going to do it in the U.S. And so we've got teams in Hong Kong and Mexico City and Singapore and Dubai. And pick a country. But you wouldn't do that unless you said, I think we can do that. You have to think that first, and you have to challenge what you currently think that is limiting where you are.
So if you wanted to give some advice to somebody on how to even begin doing this, what would be the first step that you would suggest?
Well, one of the easy things to do is to sit down with somebody and say, I want to tell you what I think about, and it could be about your career, your current situation, it could be anything. But just tell them a current situation that you're in, and just tell them, I want you to just challenge me about pushing the borders out on this. Here's a simple example. I met with a school superintendent the other day, and I said, well, could you do a program that looks like this? And his first response was, no, we couldn't do that. And I was like, okay, why can't we do that? And he said, well, I just don't think we could do that. Now, see, that's a key right there. He thinks he can't do that. I said, okay, well, what would keep us from doing that? Well, I don't know if we have the resources. What resources do we need? You just keep challenging it. And Jenn, it wasn't 10 minutes, and he was sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, we can totally do this. We can totally do this. Because you just challenge what you're thinking right now. When you find yourself saying, well, I couldn't do that. Really? Seriously? That's probably a story you're telling yourself. And I'll bet I can find a way around it.
Do you think it's because there's so much effort required in stretching and growing and taking risks and doing something different? Is it apathy or laziness, or is it just being unaware?
I think it's being unaware. I don't think it's so much apathy and laziness, because if I literally said, Jenn, I promise you that right now, we could go through some simple activities in your life that expand tenfold. I think your apathy and laziness, you look at it and say, okay, let's look at that. I really want to talk about that. So I don't look at it as being apathy and laziness. I really look at it as having a vision for what it could be. People, this is a fascinating thing from a clinical point of view, but people don't change without an emotionally compelling reason. You can tell people rationally they ought to do stuff all day, but people don't change from that. And the hottest neuroscience proves that too. I mean, it's a crystal clear deal. When you have an emotionally compelling reason to change, you will change. You really will. And so now what I want to do is find what's that reason. And you can't say, here's the other trick to change. You can't say, I don't want to do X, Y, and Z, because when you say, for example, I don't want to eat the donut, the salient thought becomes the donut, which actually triggers the exact same spot in your brain, the exact spot that says, I really want the donut, but I'm going to say I don't want the donut. But now all you're thinking about is the donut. Instead of saying that's not what I want, I don't want that, start thinking about what do you want? Well, I want to look good. I want to be healthy. I want to be fit. I want to be the best I can be. And that actually activates another part of the brain. And so that aspiration, that desire for this other thing becomes much, much greater than saying, I don't want that. So if I just said, Jenn, tell me what you want. I mean, what do you really, really want? And the better you can define that, the much greater the likelihood that you're really going to get there. So once we get it defined, now the next question is okay, what's the plan? What do I have to do to get there? All right, what are the resources I need? Okay, how do I execute the plan? And there's actually a process, and we write all that out in the book and Your Third Story.
And so your third story is the potential, the possibility, the next step?
Yep, it is. And in that story, when you write your third story, you can't even imagine, Jenn, how amazing it can be. I mean, can you imagine if you picked up a blank sheet of paper right now, and by the way, it's not blank because everybody else has already written on it, you've written on it, and you've got all these other people that have written on your life. But if you could literally lay a blank sheet of paper in front of you right now and say, I'm going to write my life. I'm actually going to write out, this is what I would want. These are the kids I would want. This is the marriage I would want. This is where I'd want to live. This is the career. This is the travel. If you wrote those things out and said, with everything in me, that's the picture I want, then the question is how do we back up and start a process to get us there? And part of that is turning loose of that second story. That's where people get stuck all the time.
Turning loose
of that second story, challenging that second story.
So I want to know why this stuff lights you up.
You can tell I'm lit up.
I can.
Because I was living a really, really happy life, a very fulfilled life, and loving what I was doing and everything else, running a nonprofit, large clinical outpatient center and a 500-acre residential treatment center. And I could not have been happier, except that I could have been. I just had no idea, Jenn. And some things happened that opened some doors for me. And literally, I would have never made that change. I would have never made that change. But some things happened that opened a door, and I looked at it and I thought, I wonder. And the next thing I did is I stepped across that threshold, and it literally was as though I had stepped into an entirely different galaxy. And when I saw that, I'll never forget. I thought, oh my gosh, where I was really happy where I was. I had no idea that I could have a much bigger impact and be much more transformative in the work that I did in serving other people. And so now it's like, it's indescribable. I don't even know how I could tell you how passionate I am about what I get to do now. But I was really happy where I was. I had just never challenged it and thought, gosh, I wonder. But I did. And
So,
it's crazy good.
so
It really
if somebody wanted to somehow get that insight, to somehow challenge where they are right now, just to see, sitting down and talking to someone, reading your book, any other things you think that they could do to dream a little and see?
Well, yeah. So what if I challenged you? And this is kind of a closing thought in one sense, but we'll come back to it. But let me ask you this: what would happen if you lived beyond your dreams, Jenn?
What would happen?
Yeah. If I just said, Jenn, tell me your dreams. Okay, now let's live beyond those.
Uh-huh.
You would literally be sitting here saying, Flip, I don't even know where that is.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. Exactly. And I am telling you, there is more than you have ever dreamed of. But we have to let ourselves go there.
And so it's giving ourselves permission to do that.
And saying, you know what? I'm going to quit just telling myself a bunch of bull. I'm not going to just make everything I'm doing right now seem okay when I really look at it. You know, I mean, Jenn, think about it. How many people that listen to your podcast are in jobs with people that they would not even want to take home and have at the dinner table with them? But they're in those jobs.
Mm-hmm.
How many people are in situations in their career right now where in the back of their mind, they know they could do more, but they're not doing it?
Mm.
And I'm sitting here saying, you know, if you just dreamed for a minute and you take that dream out, they're not meant to be kept in your pocket. You take that dream out and you lay it on the table and you say, you know, how could I do that? How could I make that happen? And I can promise you there's a way. You just have to challenge the things that are saying there's not a way.
Challenge the story.
Exactly. I mean, it's the things we tell ourselves that, you know, get us stuck.
So anything you want to tell us about the book?
Yeah, it's a great book. We had a blast writing it. You know, our first book, The Flip Side, it hit the New York Times bestseller list and USA Today and all that kind of stuff the first week out. And honestly, I was shocked. I think everybody was surprised a cowboy could write a book. So I apologize for my accent and all that, but the book did just great. And so there was a lot of people asking about the next book. And so we just finished your third story. Chris White and I wrote this book together, and it's just been a great book. And shockingly enough, the first day out, it ended up number 3 on Amazon's list, and that was really quite a treat. And Jenn, candidly, it's really humbling when you stop and think that people would take time to, you know, read your book or listen to a podcast. People's time's important, and such a privilege for somebody to read your stuff. So it's been a treat for us.
That's good. Well, I've read the very first introduction, and am excited to read the rest of it. I've got some summer reading time coming up, so I'm looking forward to learning more. Where can people find out more about you, Flip?
Oh, they can just Google, you know, Flip Flippen. It comes up a bunch of places. That's a fun name. And
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, well, it's been my name all my life. And in fact, it's a fun story, Jenn. I'll never forget. I was sitting in first grade, and my teacher was calling out the roll, and she called out my legal name. And, you know, I just sat there, and she walked over and she said, you know, Flip, I think this is you. And I was like, no, ma'am. And then she told me my real name. I had never heard my real name, Jen.
No way.
And I'm sitting here as a little first grader. I started crying. I got all upset. She sent me down to the nurse's office, and it was really kind of sad. I was like, I'm not Flip. I've always been Flip. Who am I? But it's easy to look me up. But the book is yourthirdstorybook.com. Yourthirdstorybook.com. Yeah, Twitter's at Flip Flippen, and Facebook is at Flip Flippen. Yep, there you are.
Excellent.
And it's been a great treat for us to get to do it. We've had a lot of fun with it and getting a lot of stories. People are writing stories back to us now saying, here at Flip, here's what we're challenging. And it's been out 2 weeks now. But I'm getting emails constantly now of people saying, gosh, I've never thought about, what could I do? Or why am I doing what I'm doing? And why am I telling myself what I'm telling myself when I know it's really not true? I'm just kidding myself. I don't want to do that. I want to live beyond that.
I look forward to hearing from podcast listeners after listening to your episode here to find out what they think about what they've been believing in their own stories. So I'm interested to hear that. Do you have one last piece of advice for the listener today?
Yeah, I really do. Quit kidding yourself. Quit kidding yourself. Live beyond your dreams. Quit telling yourself things just so you'll feel okay. Challenge what you're thinking, Quit kidding yourself and live beyond your dreams. There's more than you ever dreamed of.
Well, Flip, thank you for taking time out of your day. And you have time now to enjoy your ranch, I hope. And it's been lovely having you on the show.
Well, good.
You've been listening to Careers by Jenn with Jenn Swanson. If you like what you heard, please share this. If every single person listening today shared this episode with just one friend, our audience would be twice as big just like that. And the more people we can help with our content, the better. So help out a friend and help grow our audience by sharing this show with someone you know who would benefit from the content. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, take good care.